It was a brand new model called the Boeing 737 MAX 8.
They didn't understand the danger that they were walking into.
Pull up. Pull up.
The plane had flown into the sea, at full speed.
The passengers would, of course, been hysterical. Computers, laptops, phones would have been flying around.
You can tell how violent that impact was.
People shouldn't innocently buy an airplane ticket and then be in a flying coffin.
Boeing had installed a flight control system on the 737 MAX that had the power to take control of the plane from the pilots without them even knowing about it.
They're turning the pages to find out what the hell it is.
Was given the power to try to kill them, essentially, until it finally succeeded.
Will passengers be willing to fly again on its troubled MAX plane?
346 people died. Can you answer a few questions here about that?
On a sunny March morning in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, a truly remarkable group of passengers converged on Bola International Airport. 149 passengers from 35 different countries around the world got ready to board Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, heading off to Nairobi.
It was seemingly just packed with people who are on goodwill missions of various kinds. There was a big environmental conference happening in Nairobi, a UN environmental conference.
Amongst the 149 passengers were also 9 Ethiopians, and one of them was Tamru Mulu, who is a child protection advocate.
He was a kind of person who's really passionate about life, especially children who are suffering from conflict, drought.
Also on that Ethiopian Airlines flight were 8 Americans, including 24-year-old Samia Stumo, who was raised on a Massachusetts farm by a family with a very strong tradition of activism. Samia had just started work for ThinkWell, which is a global healthcare organization.
This was her first assignment. She was going to East Africa. She, at 24, had impressed them that they sent her instead of someone, a dozen years her senior.
But not everyone on that flight was on a goodwill mission. There were also 2 brothers from California, Melvin and Bennett Riffle, on one last adventure together because Melvin was about to become a new father.
Tell me how big this was for these 2 brothers to do this together. That was pretty remarkable.
I thought so. I mean,
No, I think so too.
Yeah.
I think it's rare that 2 brothers their age would stay close enough to want to travel with each other like that.
Also on Ethiopian Air 302 that morning, a young Russian couple on vacation, Alexander Polyakov and his wife, Ekaterina.
Они очень любили путешествовать. У них мечта была сразу, но они перво-наперво, как они хотели именно поехать в этот национальный парк в Кению, чтобы увидеть крупных кошек.
And as they got ready to board, Ekaterina posted this cell phone video on Instagram of their plane outside that was waiting for them.
In general, very few people think much about the model of the plane that they're on. It's something that most people really don't think twice about.
In fact, it was a brand new model welcomed into the Ethiopian Airlines fleet with a lot of ceremony just months earlier called...
We are welcoming the state-of-the-art modern airplane, the 737 MAX 8.
It was a groundbreaking move for Ethiopian Airlines to acquire this aircraft. fact that it was new, the fact that it uses the latest technology.
Boeing had had a track record of success, and all expectations at the time were that the MAX would just be, the next big thing for the company.
But it turns out this brand new plane had a secret, unknown even to the pilots. And when it was revealed, it would not just impact Boeing in shocking and unforeseen ways, but the entire air traveling community worldwide.
Boeing is an iconic American company. They're known as the king of the sky. This is a company that's at the heart of American engineering and American manufacturing.
For Captain Sully, celebrated for successfully landing his crippled plane on New York's Hudson River, Boeing has long been the gold standard for passenger aircraft.
Boeing had a century-long history of engineering excellence, an effective culture, good leadership.
There's a saying, and it stands today: if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. It's affirmation that Boeing has had our back for decades.
7 launches in 1958, and right off the bat, it is a huge success for Boeing. And it just so happens to be the same year that Frank Sinatra released
Desirable, and it was glamorous.
Air travel became sort of the vogue.
People would dress up to travel. Meals and flights were not a joke, something that people might look forward to.
The 1960s were an extraordinary period for the company because of the 7 series of planes.
707 was the first successful jet. The 737 came.
And then they would do the 747, the so-called Queen of the Skies, the first jumbo jet. Boeing, from that point forward, was the premier maker of passenger aircraft.
By the 1980s, Boeing is unmatched in terms of its power, its reach, and those 700s planes are it.
I mean, the company was so important to our country's economy, in part because it was the largest exporter in the world.
I mean, they manufacture Air Force One. I don't think you can get kind of any bigger than that.
But by the 1990s, Boeing started to face truly stiff competition from this European consortium called Airbus. But up until that point, Boeing hadn't really taken them all that seriously. But suddenly, they're up and coming.
They've really accelerated to become the only other, at this point, major global competitor to Boeing for commercial aircraft.
In late 2010, Airbus comes out with this new model that really shakes up the industry and puts serious pressure on Boeing to innovate.
The A320neo, a single-aisle aircraft that had new, more fuel-efficient engines that could fly farther and for cheaper.
People want to fly direct, and to do that, you need smaller, more efficient planes.
Boeing was focused on the wide-body world. Airbus beat them to the chase.
The A320neo. Damned if they didn't wind up becoming their fastest selling airliner. And then Boeing's like, well, wait, what are we going to do?
Boeing comes up with what they think is this really smart plan. Instead of developing an entirely new plane to catch up with Airbus, they decide to take a shortcut and revamp a model that's already on the market, saving them a lot of extra time and money.
That's when they said, okay, we can take another look at the next iteration of 737.
There were new engines, larger, more fuel-efficient engines being added to this aircraft.
Boeing calls this new model the 737 MAX, and they promise they're going to fly more people, it'll cost less money, use less fuel, and cost a lot less to operate.
United Airlines says it has cut a new deal with Boeing to build 150 737s for its fleet over the next 10 years, giving the aircraft manufacturer a leg up against its main competitor, Airbus.
The Boeing 737 MAX was the fastest selling airliner in Boeing history. Another ball out of the park for Boeing commercial aircraft.
You've got United and American and Southwest all lining up to buy it, along with 70 other buyers around the world.
One of the big customers early on was a young budget carrier in Indonesia called Lion Air. It was a huge deal.
Tonight's Money Matters, Boeing has finalized its biggest sale ever, a $22 billion order from Lion Air of Indonesia.
The 737 MAX 8 had been flying for 17 months without any incident, but then in October of 2018, suddenly, out of the blue, an alarming problem developed with one of Lion Air's brand new MAX planes.
They don't realize that there's something in it that could potentially be hazardous and something that pilots and co-pilots are not familiar with.
All of us are screaming like we are in a roller coaster. To be honest, I think this is my last flight and this is my last day.
Is the capital, the largest city. The aviation industry was booming, especially with the increase of the middle class in Indonesia.
One of the airlines that benefited from that boom in air travel is Lion Air, an aggressive, rapidly growing budget Indonesian air carrier. In 2011, Lion Air made a huge splash buying more than 200 of Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes.
Even the signing was overseen by then U.S. President Barack Obama.
So I want to congratulate Lion Air for their incredible success.
One of the Lion Air pilots chosen to fly the new 737 MAX was 31-year-old Bhavya Saneja. He's an Indian national whose dreams of being a pilot started when he was just a child.
So can you tell me about your son?
Yes, Bob, my son was a gifted child, a blessed child. I was into aviation, and for an aviator, when the child is flying and he becomes a commander, it is a big thing, you know, it is the sort of pinnacle of your dreams.
Even though her son had over 6,000 hours of flight experience, Sangeeta says she was really concerned after learning that he wouldn't be going through pilot simulator training for the MAX.
I said, you haven't had a simulator training, how can you go for a MAX? And it is a more powerful engine. So without a simulator, how will you manage?
One of the core selling points for Boeing of the 737 MAX was you don't need pilot training in the simulator.
They were selling this to airlines as essentially just another 737 that the airline pilots could fly without learning all that much new.
It's a huge deal to not have to have simulator training for pilots for any airline. It costs money and time. It takes the pilot off of the line and flying passengers around.
Lion Air had asked Boeing about simulator training for their pilots, and Boeing dissuaded them from this.
Now, according to internal Boeing documents, one of their employees ridiculed the request in a message to a colleague saying, now, Lion Air might need a sim to fly the MAX, and maybe because of their own stupidity, I'm scrambling, trying to figure out how to unscrew this now. Idiots.
Well, they were mocking them because if Lion Air required simulator training, then other airlines would say, well, wait a minute. If they're requiring it, maybe we need it. Then the whole house of cards would start to fall apart.
He said, Mom, I've been given ground training. They have given me a training on iPad. I said, what, an iPad?
So you would sit down with an iPad course, and I think there were 3 or 4 parts, and it went through a robotic voice describing what the MAX is about.
The 737 MAX has a 69-inch fan.
Did you see anything in it that looks, wow, that's substantial, we should probably do more training?
It seemed to be enough.
He trusted Boeing blindly, and that trust, you know, gave him immense confidence. He was empowered.
In October of 2018, Lion Air had a handful of the new 737 MAXes in its fleet, and one of the aircraft was going to be departing from Bali with the crew and passengers.
Me and my colleague in office, we went to Bali about October 2018. Bali is amazing for holiday, especially in Asia.
Lion Air Flight JT043 was scheduled to take off from Bali to Jakarta.
The flight was quite full of passengers, and most of them are local or domestic tourists like me. It's around 7 or 10 minutes after the takeoff, the flight suddenly feels like a fall down.
It was a dive, a steep drop 200 feet, and it wasn't something that was just caused by turbulence.
All of us are screaming like we are in a roller coaster.
How many times did it go up and down?
Up and down 4 times.
4 times?
Yes, the flight attendant who was sitting in the back, they could feel it up and down in extreme way.
When an aircraft is pitching aggressively downward, like this aircraft was, and it may feel as if your stomach is coming up into your throat, basically, but then comes the positive G's. It'll squash you down into your seat.
To be honest, I think it's almost like this is my last flight and this is my last day.
It just so happened there was a third pilot traveling on the plane, and he steps in and helps them get control of the situation.
Until it's landed to the airport, I can hear everyone like say, so relief. Some of the passengers are Muslim. I can hear that say, Alhamdulillah, thanks God. I cannot say it in a word. It's really relief. Yeah, I still feel a little bit shaky until now about that.
The pilots were able to control it. They knew they had a problem, but they didn't understand exactly what the nature of the problem was.
After the flight successfully landed in Jakarta, the pilots logged that they'd had some issues, but they'd left a lot of gaps in understanding what had happened on that flight.
That left the next crew in the dark about potential problems with the aircraft.
The very next day, Captain Suneja is assigned to an early morning flight out of Jakarta on that same 737 MAX, but he was given an incomplete report about what happened to that plane the previous night.
These are 2 different flights, but the same exact plane. So it's something that spells disaster.
On the early morning of October 29, 2018, at the airport in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, Lion Air Flight 610 was getting ready to take off. Its destination was the city of Pangkal Pinang, which is located on the Indonesian island of Bangka.
There was 189 people on board, 181 passengers, 2 pilots, and 6 crew members.
One of the passengers was Miss Fiona Ayuzen. She was a businesswoman, 29 years old. She was flying back to Bangka for work.
Bawain kopi ya, Pak, gitu. Karena saya suka kopi Bangka.
Pas pulang ke rumah, Mama bilang sekolah yang benar, terus dikasih uang jajan. Terus kalau besok paginya udah nggak ngeliat, soalnya udah berangkat duluan mamanya.
There was also another passenger by the name of Fendi Cristanto. He was flying to Bangka on a business trip and also on a personal trip. His father just passed away.
Karena dia mau mengikuti sembayang bersama dengan keluarganya untuk sembayang orang tuanya. Pulang mau ngikutin sembayang yang ke-21 hari.
One of the passengers shot some video as they were boarding the flight. No one on board, including the pilots, had any idea that this very same plane suffered a near catastrophe in the air just the previous day. And on that video, you can see the brand new 737 MAX out the window.
Lion Air Flight 610 on that same 737 MAX is taking off from Jakarta. Very shortly after the flight takes off, the pilots are struggling with the plane.
The stick shaker pops off. It is loud and it is rattling in the captain's hands. There are a cacophony, a tidal wave of other distracting alerts. Airspeed disagree, altitude disagreed.
Pull up! Pull up!
Just 10 minutes later, around 6:30 in the morning, a tugboat captain was out on the Java Sea, just east of Jakarta.
Saya merasakan ada sesuatu benda yang jatuh. Nah, di situ dalam hitungan detik terdengar dentuman cukup keras.
Apa itu?
Jadi saya menghubungi Jakarta Radio.
Iya, desa apa?
Itu telah terjadi pesawat jatuh.
The crash site, it is about 25 miles from Jakarta seaport. On my way to the crash site, really, I pray to God. I had great expectation that everybody still alive. Arriving on scene, when I saw the debris, the small pieces of fuselage, I lost my hope.
Kalau di dalam, kebanyakan itu hampir sama dengan yang ada di permukaan. Karena yang ada di dasar laut, di kedalaman itu adalah potongan-potongan tubuh ataupun bagian-bagian pesawat, entah itu serpihan, kursi.
Presiden Direktur Lion Air Edward.
When news of the crash broke, I immediately flew in from Beijing, where I was based at the time. So the sun has just gone down, and you can see all the police officers along this dock. After arriving in Jakarta, our team headed out straight to the docks where the wreckage from the plane was being brought in. Whether it crashed or what happened, we still don't even know. But these crews have been pulling up and carrying out debris piece by piece. By the next day, the family members of the passengers were gathering and anxiously really waiting for word on whether their loved ones had survived the crash. Among the family members that I got the chance to talk to was the wife of that passenger who took that video of himself boarding onto the Lion airplane just minutes before it crashed. Your husband actually was taking video of the others getting on the plane when he got on?
Yeah.
Yes. Can you show that to us? Look, these are a lot of the other passengers that were on the plane?
Yeah.
Is there still some hope that there are survivors?
Yeah, we do believe that
and came apart with such force that there was no way anyone could have survived.
Berdoa buat cepet ketemu gitu. Berdoa biar tetap selamat, tapi nggak selamat gitu.
Karena benar-benar saya kerasa kehilangan. Hubungan antara Fiona dengan ibunya ini sangat dekat. Nah, begitu mendengar kecelakaan itu benar-benar down sekali. Benar-benar shock, down. Jadi satu hari setelah pesawat jatuh, mendengar kabar ibu yang meninggal.
Fendi left behind a wife and 4 children, the youngest who was 5 years old.
Jujur ya Bu, suami saya itu kalau naik pesawat itu memang sangat khawatir. Dia itu paling takut kalau naik. Dengan rasa ketakutan yang dia.
737 MAX, it had only 800 flight hours.
But it turns out there was a hidden danger on that plane. A flight control system that Boeing did not even tell the pilots about.
There was nothing in the manuals that alerted the pilots to the existence of this new system that was placed on the MAX.
Pull up.
It has one mission, and that's to drive the nose down.
Terrain.
And it will not stop.
Pull up.
He was given the power to try to kill them, essentially, until it finally succeeded.
Pull up.
Devastating plane.
My first thoughts were, boy, it's a brand new airplane. It must have been bad maintenance, or it must have been pilot error.
A lot of Indonesians initially just saw that this was Lion Air's fault.
ABC's David Curley has the story. Good morning, David.
George, the real thing that we need to find are those 2 black boxes, which will yield a lot of answers to all these questions.
The National Transport Safety Committee found the flight data record.
It becomes clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The pilots are struggling with the plane, almost in a tug of war.
When we found the black box, we found that the aircraft was pitching up and then down, down and up and down and up. It's up and down for about 24 times.
Had you ever seen anything quite like this?
I never knew any case of the aircraft can fly up and down like this. I knew that the pilot was fighting with the aircraft.
It would have been a terrifying roller coaster ride. During that time period, the passengers would have, of course, been hysterical. Things would have been flying in the cabin. Computers, laptops, phones would have been flying around. People would have been screaming.
It was a clear weather, so they could see the sea. And I think it will be very scary for everyone in the cabin to see outside, to feel the speed.
Sepuluh menit atau berapa itu? Rasa ketakutannya sangat amat.
Yakin saat itu dia sangat takut sekali, Bu, dengan pesawat yang goyang seperti itu. Saya bisa ngerasain juga.
When the cockpit recorder was eventually recovered, it was revealed that pilots were rifling through the pilot manual, trying to apparently figure out what to do.
They're turning the pages to find out what the hell it is, why the aircraft is going down.
They start shouting about which procedure should do. They knew that they were having serious problems and they just screaming the name of God.
That point of time, that only pain he must have felt was the sense of failure, that he's not able to save others, except that he was a brave child, you know.
We surprised. It's very strange that the aircraft doing that way. Then we asked Boeing what kind of system that may create this way.
What Boeing revealed to investigators came as a complete surprise. It turns out that Boeing had installed a flight control system on the 737 MAX that had the power to take control of the plane from the pilots without them even knowing about it. The program was called MCAS.
MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, and that this system, under certain circumstances, can trigger in such a way that it will cause the airplane to nose down.
Why did Boeing put this MCAS system? What was it for? It's a mystery not only for us, but also for the pilot and co-pilot on board the plane.
So the reason they put MCAS on the airplane was because they put these brand new huge engines on an old airframe.
In order to have sufficient ground clearance, they moved the engine further up above the leading edge of the wing and further forward, and that changed the way the airplane flew.
And this effect of the engines came in and the airplane starts to want to pitch up all by itself. The idea was to provide something that would offset that pitching moment or causing the nose to come up.
When the plane computers think the plane is in danger of a stall, so in very basic terms, MCAS pushes the plane's nose down by automatically triggering the rear horizontal stabilizer.
So the MCAS is there to correct what MCAS thinks is wrong.
Right.
The pilots have no idea why this plane is going down against their will,
Yes.
so they try to fight it back.
Yes. One of the most fundamental muscle memory things a pilot knows how to do. If the nose goes down too far, you pull it back and you trim. And this battle goes back and forth a couple of dozen times.
So it was MCAS, it was the computer against the pilot.
Yes, and the way MCAS was designed, it was given the control authority to do it as many times as necessary. In other words, it was given the power to try to kill them, essentially, until it finally succeeded.
Boeing's revelations about the MCAS system and what caused it to activate on the Lion Air flight in the first place would cause an uproar in the pilot community, and it would all lead to a secretly taped meeting where Boeing was recorded telling pilots that MCAS was being fixed.
Those are going to be relatively straightforward software changes that we expect to be done in a fairly short period of time. We want to make sure we're fixing the right things.
But while that was happening, the plane would continue to fly.
They were rolling the dice with the lives of the global traveling public.
Now that urgent safety warning from Boeing about their brand new 737 jets after that deadly crash in Indonesia. Now concerns about a feature that could malfunction, causing planes to abruptly dive.
A week after the Lion Air crash, Boeing issued a safety bulletin to the airlines, finally revealing the existence of a flight control system on the 737 MAX that could unexpectedly force the plane's nose down.
It's an admission by the company that there is a potential glitch in its newest aircraft.
Just a few days later, Boeing tells operators for the first time that there's a new and previously undisclosed system on the aircraft. And that is MCAS.
That was a shock. It's not in our manuals at all, except in one section, our abbreviation section. We didn't know what MCAS meant. It meant nothing to us.
But there was another critical question to be answered. What caused MCAS to force the nose of the Lion airplane down in the first place? The plane was flying normally, so why did MCAS activate?
Among a lot of surprises was that MCAS was triggered by a faulty angle of attack indicator, which is a relatively innocuous piece of equipment on the side of the airplane.
The angle of attack sensor was feeding incorrect data about the angle of the plane's nose.
It was telling the plane that it was, approaching a stall situation, that its nose was pitched up.
So the plane thought that the nose was angled too high, when in fact it wasn't.
And that MCAS needed to come in and push the nose back down.
And there was a further revelation about MCAS that took investigators by complete surprise. Even though there are 2 angle of attack sensors on the 737 MAX, MCAS only relied on one of them.
It's a lack of redundancy that appears to my mind to be unacceptable in airplane design, because the AOA indicator is susceptible to damage. It's not a robust piece of equipment.
A single point of failure hooked to a safety critical system, you just don't do that. It's crazy.
The bottom line here is the 737 MAX is safe, and the safety is a core value for us at Boeing.
Boeing CEO Dennis Muhlenberg went on Fox Business to reassure the public that a bulletin had been sent to all the airlines instructing pilots exactly what to do if there was another emergency situation involving the 737 MAX.
We've already issued a couple of additional bulletins that point them back to existing flight procedures to handle that kind of condition.
So Boeing is telling the pilots that one of their options is to simply turn off the power supply to the electric motor on the stabilizer. That's the, the piece that pivots up and down and controls the nose of the aircraft.
Boeing pointed out that the pilots on that previous Lion Air flight who overcame a mid-air emergency involving MCAS had followed the appropriate procedure by turning off power to the stabilizer. That was a step the pilots on the fatal flight did not take.
And that was perceived to be an indirect way of blaming the airline and blaming the pilots without also acknowledging design shortcomings of the system.
It emotionally tore me apart, as if I was blamed for him being the pilot. I was blamed for killing all the people, mothering a son who could not take care of his passengers.
Pilots were furious. pilot unions asked Boeing, why didn't you tell us if you put something on the airplane that's going to actually interfere with my job?
Late November, about a month after the accident, 4 Boeing executives traveled to the headquarters of the Allied Pilots Association, the union that represents pilots at American Airlines.
That meeting was secretly recorded by the head of the pilots union.
Our president at the time wanted to make sure we knew exactly what was said.
We flat out deserve to know what is on our airplanes.
I don't disagree.
I don't know that understanding this system would have changed the outcome of this. We try not to overload the crews with information that's unnecessary, so they actually know the information that we believe is important.
It enraged us. Boeing always gives you the information. They don't parcel it out.
We're working with the FAA right now to try to figure out what software changes we might make to eliminate the failure conditions that we experienced at Dateline here.
They said, well, we're going to correct the software, all the things that you brought up.
Those are going to be relatively straightforward software changes that we expect we can get out in a fairly short period of time. Weeks, not a year, but a couple, maybe 6 weeks-ish.
But the question I have for you is, do you feel comfortable that the situation is under control today before any software fixes are implemented?
Absolutely.
They were taking a gamble with keeping that in the air. They had such a big bet on the 737 MAX. They had staked their reputation. They had staked their financial future on it.
4 months after that Lion Air crash, the 737 MAX is still flying all over the world. Meanwhile, 149 people are saying their goodbyes as they prepare to board that Ethiopian Airlines flight to Kenya. Among them, young Samia Stumo, who had just flown in from D.C. and was transiting to Nairobi for her assignment with her global health care organization.
I guess she had landed in Ethiopia, and I said, safe travels with a bunch of exclamation points, and she said, thanks, boo.
We didn't know that there was an issue with the plane. We thought that the problem that happened in India.
Maybe they didn't understand the danger that they were walking into.
Samia, where are you? Where are you, Samia?
Boeing killed my daughter.
Pull up.
We flat out deserve to know what is on our airplanes.
The nose is pointing down, and it's over.
Not a plane there. There was a hole in the ground.
The pilots have no idea why this plane is going down against their will.
Pilots were furious. Why didn't you tell us if you put something on the airplane that's going to actually interfere with my job?
What really shocks me is their greed. How they have the audacity to do what they're doing.
You're not the person anymore to solve the situation.
And they really should go to jail.
The Berkshires are in western Massachusetts, at the very far western end of the state, right up against the New York state line. The Stumos live in a town called Sheffield, and it's an absolutely lovely spot. It's quite a large farm and has this unbelievable view of the mountain range just to the west.
You can see the lower field. It's a cornfield.
How much land is there here?
180 acres.
Nadia Milleron and her husband Michael Stumo moved to this farm after a career as attorneys and advocates in Winsted, Connecticut. That's also the home of the brother of Nadia's mom, perhaps the most famous consumer rights activist in American history.
The standard can be considered so inadequate that it is deemed illegal for the consumer interest.
Nadia's uncle is Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader became famous through his activism in Washington and his whole war on auto safety and all the rest.
I think he's had a big influence in both of our lives in terms of trying to make better things happen.
Nadia and Michael had 3 sons and 1 daughter who they named Samia.
She was a force of nature. She was just, oh gosh, she was
you know, beautiful, intelligent, charismatic. She could just light up a room. But around here, you know, she raised pigs. She would sell the meat to the neighbors. If she decided you needed to buy her pork, you were going to buy her pork.
Samia very much absorbed the family ethic, that you were supposed to use your time well, you develop your skills. She became very good at her instrument, which for her was cello. Watching Samia, you got the sense of someone who had really kind of brought together all these strains in the family, starting with Uncle Ralph in his activism, and then through her own parents.
Definitely he influenced Samia tremendously because she was out there at 9 years old campaigning for his presidential campaign. They made her cry. You know, your mother shouldn't allow you to be out here, and Ralph Nader is spoiling the election, and she understood the issues and she talked right back at them.
She had leadership written all over her. She had compassion in an intellectually rigorous way. Everybody loved her.
One pivotal moment in young Samia's life that fueled her drive to change the world was the tragic childhood death of her brother Nels.
He was diagnosed with cancer at 15, 16 months of age, and he ended up not making it. He died a little over 2 years old. We actually, we only have one picture with all 4 kids.
Did she ever tell you that part of her motivation and dream to get into medicine was because of what happened to Nels?
Yeah, she did. She believed that, you know, her calling was healthcare, and I think that was partially a result of her exposure to her brother's illness.
Samia went to the University of Massachusetts and then managed to get a full-ride scholarship for the public health master's program at the University of Copenhagen.
Everybody liked her, but she was very firm in her beliefs. It really kind of forced you to think about what you said, think about what you believe, and defend it.
When I met Samia, I was like really shy to talk to people. We just would go on these fun adventures. It just helped me be more fearless. She had this knack of making you feel as fascinating as she was.
In January of 2019, Samia had landed a dream job in Washington, D.C. with a global public health organization called ThinkWell.
Just a few months into her new job at ThinkWell, Samia gets her first assignment to go overseas. They were going to send her over to East Africa in March of 2019, where she was going to help set up some new offices.
This is the kind of thing that a relatively seasoned person is usually put into, and someone like Samia, without much experience in this, we were just so blown away by her that we felt that she had the acumen to be able to figure this out.
As Samia got ready for her Africa trip, perhaps the last plane, killing everyone on board.
And now we're going to turn to that.
A new flight control system Boeing had installed on the plane called MCAS.
Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. This system, under certain circumstances, can trigger in such a way that it will cause the airplane to nose down, independent of the pilot's judgment.
It turns out there was a defective sensor on that Lion airplane that accidentally triggered MCAS to activate and caused the plane to repeatedly go into a dive before it finally crashed.
After Lion Air, there was not a lot of urgency. I think it was sort of easy to dismiss it as a one-off. I would say it pretty quickly faded from view for the majority of the traveling public.
On March 10th, 2019, Samia left D.C. for Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where she would be transferring to another plane on her way to her assignment in Kenya.
So there's 149 travelers from around the world, and they're about to get on the newest Boeing airliner, the 737 MAX. They have no idea of the danger.
On March 10th, 2019, Samia Stumo had just arrived in the Ethiopian Addis Ababa after a long flight from Washington, D.C.
When I woke up, I just looked at the message, and it said 2 more hours to Nairobi.
There were 149 passengers on that flight from 35 countries, most of them heading to Nairobi for a UN conference.
Also, at Gate 12 in Terminal 2, those two brothers from California, Melvin and Bennett Riffle, who were enjoying a globe-trotting jaunt together before the birth of Melvin's daughter.
When we said goodbye, he gave me a kiss and gave me a kiss on the stomach for Emma, you know, and he was all excited but nervous.
There were also this young Russian couple who posted a video on Instagram showing the 737 MAX, a brand new aircraft.
Unlike the pilots involved in that Indonesian crash, the Ethiopian Airlines pilots knew about Boeing's MCAS flight control system, and Boeing had actually sent a directive to airlines instructing pilots what to do if a plane went into a sudden dive on its own.
So Boeing is telling the pilots to turn off the power supply to the electric motor on the stabilizer. That's the, you know, the piece that pivots up and down and controls the nose of the aircraft.
It was a bright Sunday morning. The plane took off at 8:30. And 3 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft started behaving erratically.
Their instruments start to show different readings.
After 6 minutes later, the plane was spotted again, about 30 miles from Addis in a small. Immediately drive to the Ethiopian Airlines compound. There were family members, people were crying, and some of them holding their head, and it was so horrifying to see them.
An hour earlier or something, I talked to him, and it just didn't feel right.
I don't know, I was trying to deny that it happened, or it's true, or somehow he has been spared.
We start in Ethiopia, where around 157 people are feared dead after a plane crashed early on Sunday.
Within, I think it was 2.5 hours or 3 hours, we were on a plane headed to Addis Ababa.
This dirt road takes you to the field where that crash site is.
So finally, after almost 3.5 hours that we arrive, a plane came down at such an enormous rate of speed, basically as fast as a cruise.
Ethiopian Airlines flight has crashed.
With victims from 35 different countries on board, grief resonates all around the world, including in a small seaside town in Russia.
Ну, просто очень обидно, когда такие дети на взлете, так сказать, и на взлете своей карьеры, на взлете всего погибают.
In the Northern California town of Redding, a phone rings in the Riffle home.
It was the embassy in Ethiopia. I said, I know why you're calling. Is it both boys? And they said it was.
It's something you can't believe when you hear it. It's just like you're in a nightmare or something, and it's totally unbelievable.
It's one thing to lose one of your children, and you lost both.
Yeah. Lost our family, and we had to help Brittany.
I said, please don't tell me my husband's dead. And Susan said, both of them. And I just collapsed. What do I do now? I'm pregnant. What do I do? Our baby. What? What do I do now?
And word of the terrible crash also travels to a family farm nestled in the Berkshires in Massachusetts.
I turned on the BBC. It said that a plane had crashed. I remember I couldn't breathe. Then I woke up, Michael, and he told me, what are you talking about? That's impossible. That's what he told me.
My sister is not going to die in a crash. It doesn't fit into your world.
And we thought, oh, well, maybe she survived.
needed to get to Ethiopia right away to tell her. We had to be there. And we had to protect her.
We got in a car and we headed for JFK, got on the flight, and along the way, along our journey, we learned that there were no survivors.
There was not a plane there. There was a hole in the ground.
Data now in the hands of Ethiopian officials.
As the investigation continued in the cause of the crash, there was a question on many people's minds. Would Boeing 737 MAX
the same thing happen?
Next day, and it didn't take long for investigators to conclude.
Angle of attack sensor triggered the activation of
the first officer saying, pitch up, pitch up, pitch up, while the MCAS was kicking and nosediving the aircraft. It was so difficult for them to keep the aircraft under control.
Despite similarities between the two crashes, this time there was a huge difference. Not only the Ethiopian Airlines pilots knew about MCAS, they also followed Boeing's instruction on how to disable it.
The crew performed all the procedures repeatedly provided by the manufacturer, but was not able to control the aircraft.
This was actually pretty shocking because Boeing had been suggesting that overcoming an erroneous MCAS activation was pretty straightforward. If that was the case, why did this second accident happen?
To better understand why those pilots could not recover control of the plane, we asked two experienced American Airlines pilots and members of the Allied Pilots Association to take us through what might have occurred in that Ethiopian Airlines cockpit based on information from the black boxes. So in here, what will we see?
In this airplane, while it is not a MAX, the displays are very similar, but what's unique about the MAX in this case is the MCAS.
I'll be kind of simulating the MCAS with my electric trim switch to show what the MCAS would be doing.
So now we're going to take off from the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, heading to Kenya.
Yep.
Shortly after the takeoff, faulty data from the plane's angle of attack sensor triggers a myriad of false alerts in that cockpit.
Seconds after you take off.
Altitude disagree, airspeed disagree.
The stick shaker is shaking continuously, very loud. This will not stop throughout the entire flight.
In the middle of all these distractions, MCAS suddenly activates.
MCAS is firing. Starts to push the nose down. I'm pulling back, and then I trim up, get a little bit of trim up on it, and the MCAS kicks in again. The MCAS is more powerful and fast than what the pilot can do, so it'll always win more.
It was at this point that the Ethiopian Airlines pilots followed Boeing's instructions and cut off electronic power to the stabilizer in the plane's tail. So you realize that MCAS is not working.
But the problem now is that the nose is so far down, they're having trouble
holding it back, yeah.
MCAS had left the plane in such a precarious position that the pilots did not have the physical strength to manually pull it out of that deep dive.
Now the stick is getting very, very heavy, so the captain says, pull with me, which is basically saying, help me. I've got a lot of weight on this, but I have no trim to do it. I go, okay, manual trim.
Okay, and I'm trying, but it's not working.
I can't hold it back.
Unable to control the plane manually, in a last-ditch effort, the Ethiopian pilots decided to turn the electronic stabilizer system back on.
The MCAS fires. And this fire goes and goes. I'm pulling back, a little bit of trip. And now the nose is pointing down and it's over. Stop the sim. They're headed toward the ground. They turn those switches back on, which is not in a checklist, but welcome to the battlefield. You're staring at the ground and you don't know what else to do.
Do you ever think about what goes through the mind and the heart of pilots when the plane is going down?
Yes, I don't like to think about that. I think that's everyone's worst nightmare.
It's hard. But they fought. They fought. They did what pilots do. The system let them down. The system let them down.
Unlike with Lion Air, the Ethiopian Air crash has sudden and swift repercussions for Boeing. Ethiopian Air immediately grounds their entire MAX fleet, and like a domino effect, countries around the world start grounding their fleets.
All of us at Boeing are deeply sorry for the loss of life in the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 and Lion Air Flight 610 accidents.
Boeing was saying that they were working on adding safeguards to MCAS to make a safe airplane even safer.
Would the accident have happened without MCAS, though? You call it a link.
It's a chain of events, right? There is no singular item. It's a chain of events.
But what you came up with in the end was flawed, was it not?
We've designed the MAX to have the flying qualities that were desired in the hands of the pilots. The MCAS system.
They will not easily admit their wrongdoing, even where it is very evident. And that was the case with Boeing at that particular time.
346 people died. Can you answer a few questions here about that?
He's sorry that we lost our family members. He doesn't take any accountability for having caused their deaths.
If Boeing thought that Nadia and Michael and the other victims' families were going to just quietly go away and not try to hold the company accountable, they could not have been more wrong.
It was amazing to behold these two people from this farm in western Massachusetts coming down to take on really one of the biggest corporations in the world.
Mr. Stumo, thank you for your presence today.
Boeing killed my daughter. We're not afraid of anybody.
In the fall of 2019, and they actually included some artifacts.
We got back Samia's business journal, which talks about her plans. We got back her passport. This is a business blouse that she took with her, and it all smells of jet fuel. They fill the room with the smell. I mean, to me, it's a smell of death.
I don't want other mothers and other families to go through this. I don't want them to be trying to hear their daughter's voice and, wonder what you would say to them. So that's why it's important to work on aviation safety. Because people shouldn't innocently buy an airplane ticket and then be in a flying coffin.
While Nadia and her husband Michael were consumed by grief, they were able to quickly turn their anguish into action against Boeing.
The family of Samia Stumo shares their pain so that others don't feel the same.
Michael and Nadia fly to Chicago and file the first lawsuit against Boeing by an American family.
I want her death not to be in vain. I don't want anybody else to die.
Nadia and Michael, along with more than 100 other families of victims around the world, alleged that MAX had a defective design and that Boeing issued inadequate warnings about the plane, something that Boeing denies.
This is going to go down as one of the most callous, deliberate efforts to keep a product in the public domain for the wrong reasons.
What really shocks me is their greed. I don't know how they can still, sleep at night.
But there was a second front in Nadia and Michael's battle against Boeing. They and the other families were determined to take part in the congressional hearings into what went wrong with the 737 MAX and make sure that another crash never happened again.
We have 3 generations of farm advocacy in my family, and Nadia, of course, has, Ralph Nader and her family and that advocacy.
People should not fly this plane if it's ungrounded.
My uncle said to us practical things.
To never settle for staff, always go for the top.
Like it's cruel irony. Samia's family knew how to do it because it's a very complicated system to navigate, and it's a fight.
Nadia has really been, I think, a principal support for many of the other families out there, while Michael is pursuing the more, what's the fix and what went wrong.
As we go forward, this committee will leave no stone unturned.
We kept saying you can't just have the bureaucrats and the engineers and the pilots. It's all about the families.
Today, I speak not only with my voice, but the voices of my departed family.
Paul Girogi testified.
And he had lost his entire family.
I think about the last 6 minutes a lot. My wife and my mom-in-law knew they were going to die. They had to somehow comfort the children during those final moments, knowing they were all their last. I wish I was there with them.
At the congressional hearings, there was some talk that foreign pilots failed to respond appropriately.
For me, the accident report reaffirms my belief that pilots trained in the United States would have successfully been able to handle this situation.
Chair now recognizes Captain Chelsea B. Sullenberger III.
That claim was called out after the dramatic appearance of perhaps the most famous pilot in America, Chesley Sullenberger.
I'm one of a relatively small group of people who have experienced such a crisis and lived to share what we learned about it.
Sully was the miracle on the Hudson pilot. He successfully landed his plane on New York's Hudson River after a bird strike crippled his engines. Captain Sullenberger became a national hero, immortalized by Tom Hanks in the movie Sully.
Like many pilots, I was disappointed that many were blaming the dead crews of the accident flights. I've got to tell you from personal, first-hand experience how real and how intense the startle factor is.
I recently experienced all these warnings in a 737 MAX flight simulator during recreations of the accident flights. Even knowing what was going to happen, I could see how crews could have run out of time before they could have solved the problems.
Boeing, built into their design of MCAS sort of an assumption that pilots would be able to react to something going wrong within 4 seconds.
Well, think about that. Let's start the clock. Now, 2, 3. That's it. It's just really unlikely almost any airline crew would have acted effectively that fast. These accidents should never have happened. And I'm really distressed that they happened.
But the investigation into Boeing would go much deeper, raising questions about whether Boeing knew about problems with the MAX before they put it in the air.
The information coming out of the investigation is shocking.
And it would all lead to a face-to-face confrontation between a grieving mother from a farm and the head of one of the most powerful companies in the world.
And I want to, confront a situation, but I want to say it to you directly because I don't think you understand what we're saying.
Things that are coming out of the investigation are shocking about what Boeing knew and what it was saying internally.
House investigation concluded that the safety of the flying public was put into jeopardy by Boeing's pressure to compete with Airbus.
The committee uncovered emails and communications showing that there had been lower-level employees who raised questions several times about MCAS.
In an internal email, a Boeing engineer wrote about that problem that triggered MCAS in both plane crashes, saying, "Are we vulnerable to single sensor failures with the MCAS implementation?" This is back in 2015, asking about the vulnerability of these particular devices.
Yeah, they're setting my daughter up to die in 2019. These are questions of life and death. But that's not how they treated them in the company.
House investigators released documents they had obtained from inside Boeing showing that their own training pilots had a very dismissive attitude towards regulators and customers.
One Boeing employee who emerged as a central figure in the investigation was Chief Technical Pilot Mark Fortner, who became well known in the media after his emails became public.
Mark Fortner was the one who asked regulators whether they could remove any mention of MCAS from the Flight Crew Operations Manual. Fortner, in some of the emails and instant messages, was kind of gloating at his ability to, as he said, Jedi mind trick regulators.
In fact, it was Fortner who wrote that instant message to a colleague mocking Lion Air for their stupidity in requesting simulator training, referring to them as idiots.
His emails were shocking, but they're just the tip of the iceberg of the failure of the safety culture at Boeing.
Some Boeing employees openly questioned the safety culture of the company during development of the 737 MAX. In one email, a worker said, "This airplane is designed by clowns, who in turn are supervised by monkeys." Another Boeing employee wrote, "Frankly, right now all my internal warning bells are going off, and for the first time in my life, I'm sorry to say that I'm hesitant about putting my family on a Boeing airplane."
The safety culture was eviscerated under production pressure.
Meanwhile, Nadia, Michael, and the other families have another battle to fight. And that's with the Federal Aviation Administration, which certified the 737 MAX as safe and allowed it to fly even after the first crash.
One of the most explosive discoveries came from within the Federal Aviation Administration. And remember, the FAA's sole job is to ensure the safety of the traveling public.
After the Lion Air accident, the FAA had done an analysis, that indicated that if nothing was changed, that there might be, 15 accidents over the course of the next decades while the MAX was in use. And, that would make it, the deadliest commercial airliner, ever.
We stood out there in front of the FAA with our sign.
Her life was just cut short. That was caused by complicity with Boeing.
For the first time, and on tonight's one-year anniversary of the first 737 MAX crash, Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg faced Congress.
For Nadia, Michael, and the other families, the person they really wanted answers from was the man in charge of Boeing.
When Dennis Muilenburg comes to Washington to testify, it's a really big moment.
I've met with the families. They keep faces of their loved ones in people's minds. They're not going to be forgotten.
I, too, would like to acknowledge the families that are here with us today. And again, wanted to tell you I'm sorry. We are deeply, deeply sorry. And we'll never forget.
He was just saying words for the camera. They never tried to reach the families personally.
Who bears the principal responsibility at Boeing for the cascading events that resulted in the crash of Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302?
Mr. Chairman, my company and I are responsible. We're responsible for our airplanes. And we know there are things we need to improve. I'd grown up on a farm in Iowa. My parents taught me the value of hard work and integrity.
To do the aw shucks Iowa farm boy thing, I'm an Iowa farm boy. It doesn't cut it with me, and it was grating.
Mr. Muilenburg, I have a question, as I probably won't get to ask it another time. Where you talked about Iowa just like one too many times, and the whole group said, "Go back to the farm. Go back to Iowa. Do that." You're not the person anymore to solve the situation. But I want to say it to you directly, because I don't think you understand what we're saying.
I respect that. I really do. In the end, it's about safety, and
Even if you're not capable of doing that.
I respect your inputs there. I just tell you, we are very focused on safety, and you have.
I wanted to pierce through to the human being. Imagine being in our shoes.
Just a couple months after the House hearing, Muilenburg was forced out as CEO of Boeing.
But while Muilenburg may be gone, the clouds of suspicion over Boeing remain.
And the Justice Department is investigating, and hopefully some people are going to go to jail.
But after losing billions because of the MAX scandal, Boeing's commercial future may hinge on one question: will passengers be willing to fly again on its troubled MAX?
The Justice Department has launched a criminal investigation into the plane's development.
The government opened a criminal probe. The investigation is focused on whether Boeing withheld information from regulators.
The Justice Department would not talk to us about the criminal investigation, but sources have told 2020 that at this point, agents are looking hard at one former Boeing employee in particular.
Prosecutors at the Department of Justice were focusing on building a case involving Mark Faulkner, the former chief technical pilot for the 737 MAX.
Faulkner's attorney did not respond to our repeated requests for comment, but has stated in the past that as a pilot and Air Force vet, he would never jeopardize the safety of other pilots or their passengers.
He was part of the culture of concealment, but it certainly does not end with him. There's a lot of people much higher up in the food chain in Boeing who were involved in this.
They really should go to jail. I mean, people who are responsible for decisions which kill other human beings should be personally responsible.
But the ongoing criminal investigation is one of just many problems facing Boeing right now. Their reputation is in tatters.
At this point, Boeing is looking feverishly for any success.
Getting the MAX flying is still at the top of their list.
Boeing has made a number of changes to its MAX plane. MCAS will now rely on both sensors. It'll only activate once. Pilots will also be required to complete flight simulator training. And in a statement to 2020, Boeing said it had made a series of meaningful changes to strengthen our company's safety practices and culture.
Cleared for travel. That was the message from the Federal Aviation Administration to Boeing for its 737 MAX.
One of the longest aircraft groundings in history is over.
I am 100% comfortable with my family flying on it.
After a 20-month grounding, just last week, the FAA approved the Boeing 737 MAX to return to the skies.
And on its website, American Airlines advertises the first MAX flight from Miami to New York City on December 29th.
I do think the 737 is a safe airplane. I have no issue about that. But this MCAS thing was bad. I think that trust is going to be really hard to get back at this point.
Neither of us would ever get on the 737 MAX, and we will warn every single person we know to make sure that they don't fly on a 737 MAX.
Mr. Stumo, thank you for your presence today.
Meanwhile, this summer, Michael testified about reforming the FAA certification process, which, under federal rules, allows aircraft manufacturers to largely oversee the testing and development of planes themselves.
The FAA's core vision appears to be to reduce its direct involvement in certification.
It was like the fox guarding the chicken coop. When you have Boeing certifying Boeing, hello, what do you expect out of that?
System is not broken. However, all processes need to be improved, really each and every day.
The FAA did not respond to 2020's request for an interview to discuss the issues surrounding the 737 MAX. After the hearing, Nadia and Michael briefed victims' families from around the world on a Zoom meeting.
Thank you, really, Michael, for what you just said.
We have a role to play. You or anybody has a role to play as a victim.
She's been a great advocate for the families, her and her husband, Michael. No, I can't thank them enough.
I know the sun is in your eyes.
On the other side of the country in Redding, California, Melvin Riffle's daughter was born just 2 months after he was killed in the Ethiopian air crash. Melvin had picked out a name for his then unborn daughter, Emma.
So over here, I would like Emma to remember Melvin by. This is actually his passport. This is the only thing that I got off the plane. Look, Emma, who is that? That Daddy? Yeah, it is on.
This is Samia's room. I can't believe that this is remained untouched for more than a year. I look for Samia all the time. I call Samia. Sometimes I'm in the house by myself. I just shout, Samia, Samia, where are you? Where are you, Samia? But Boeing took her, and I wish I could trade places with her. She deserved to live, and the world deserved to have Samia. I know she would want her family to fight that other people not die.
Sammy just wants people that are wrong to be righted.
When police investigators arrived, they found a very violent and brutal attack.
The body of schoolboy Breck Bednar lies in an Essex flat.
Breck is a young gamer. He's only 14 years old. He was on his back with his arms underneath him. It's a very unusual position. He was still bound by duct tape behind his back. It was unique for myself and for Essex Police, really, because of the nature of the way it was carried out.
This didn't look to be a simple case of murder. He'd had his throat cut, and it was clear that Breck died in a very awful way.
I tried for years to have Breck when I realized and when I decided I wanted to have a family. And it did take quite a long time. So when he came, I was over the moon.
Breck Bednar was born in London to US citizen Lauren Lefebvre and her then husband Barry.
I say he was my first love and my most important love. And I've said this before, and it's not nice to my husband, but, you know, men can come and go, but your firstborn turns you into someone you've never been. They make you a parent. And I loved being a mother.
Lauren, who is a teaching assistant, notices that Breck has a natural ability with anything technical.
He was a clever boy, and as he grew, you could tell that he loved playing and doing with anything that he could build or make or fix. From a young age, he would, you know, if there was a remote control, I'd find him taking it apart, putting it back together, a radio, any sort of gadget. In fact, we sometimes called him Brecky Gadget because he just would have everything, studying how it worked and how it was put together.
He was smart, he was funny, he was caring, but he was also a typical older brother. He was embarrassed of me at school. He never liked to admit that I was his sister, and I would wave at him and he would be embarrassed, but he was always there for me if I needed.
Right from when he was 8 to 10 years old, he could use a computer much better than I could, and I just lost ground after that and never caught up. But he just had that knack.
I remember Breck playing tons of games online, and me and my siblings were just fascinated by whatever he was playing because he was always the best. He would always win. I just preferred watching. We didn't see any danger to it because we were just so impressed by how well he was playing and how much it made him happy that he was playing and that he had an audience.
His passion was anything to do with computing, and those were the kind of friends that he made within school. They invited him into a gaming group, and for me it felt safe because I knew those boys and I knew their families, I knew where they lived. For him it would have felt comfortable because he had known them since he was young, and that's when he started spending more time gaming online.
Breck has a particular passion for a game called Battlefield 4, and he's playing it obsessively with his friends.
At the beginning, I was happy that Breck was enjoying his friends from school. Because of the divorce, he had to switch schools a couple of times. And I think that's a really hard thing for a kid to do. And I was glad that he was having fun. You know, I could sort of relate to why he was enjoying, you know, the excitement of the games they were playing together.
I remember the first time I heard Danes' name, and I was just like, oh, Breck's got a friend, and I was all excited. I mean, he had plenty of friends at school, but it wasn't a school friend. It was like a new online friend, which seemed fun because it was somebody not from school. It was maybe somebody from a different area, which could have been exciting.
Breck and his friends play on a server, a private group within the online game they played. It was run by a teenager called Lewis Danes, who is just 4 years older than Breck.
I remember the day, the door was open, he was having a good time, but I heard a different voice than I had heard before, and it was deeper, it was more in charge, it was more in control. When I asked Breck about this new person who I didn't recognize, Breck wasn't worried at all. He said the other boys have been gaming with him for years.
Danes impresses the younger schoolboys with stories about his life.
Lewis Danes told the online gamers who formed part of the server that he ran that he was a successful software engineer who was living a high life. He told people that he fleeted between New York, in Syria, and also that he was working with the US government, and that he was working for Microsoft as well. So he very much portrayed himself as somebody who was a high flyer in the gaming world.
Danes tells the boys he left school early to pursue his dreams.
He's saying that, you know, you don't need to go to uni, you don't need education, look how successful I am, and I made my own way, I create my own success.
Some of the boys soon begin to look up to him as their leader.
I think Danes was, by all accounts, very charismatic. He was articulate, he was funny, he was friendly, which of course would make the online gamers want to interact with him and ask for his advice.
When I would go into Breck's room, the door was open. He had 3 screens, and on one screen was the names of all the gamers, and then the action was in the middle, and then there were pictures of some of the gamers, live feeds. And the thing was, Danes never had his face showing. And so I would say to Breck, well, why isn't he showing his face? And Breck's like, oh, because he does some important work, so he keeps private. I tried to Google him. I couldn't find any photos. I found it unusual that the boys were showing their face, but the person we didn't know was keeping his identity hidden. This person who we didn't know would chat with me, and he'd say, hey, Mom, how are you? And I'd say, oh, good, yeah, it's sunny here. What's it like in New York City? He'd say, oh, it's a bit cold. No, oh, what have you been doing? Oh, I can't really go out much. I'm working all the time, really, really busy. And I'm just thinking, come on, you're 17 years old, you're living in New York City supposedly, and you don't have anything to say, like not a show, not a gig. And he never seemed like he was on New York time zone. So I had huge doubts that he was actually in the States, and I always felt like he could have been, you know, 2 streets over. There was only one time that any of the boys saw what Danes looked like, and it was when Breck and one of his friends met Danes on a live stream in a very darkened room, and Danes barely let them see his identity, but they saw it enough to be able to tell that he was actually a teenager like them. And I think that was really a pivotal point, because at that point they thought, Breck's mom is so paranoid. He's not a creepy old guy. He is a teenager like us. And I think they let their guard down then. At the beginning, all of the guys were looking up to Danes and thinking he was amazing.
14-year-old Breck Bednar's mum is concerned about a mysterious gamer called Lewis Danes, who has invited her son to join his gaming server. Records of the group's online conversations show talk was often steered towards the topic of sex.
Lewis was pushing the boundaries, so there would be a lot of dick talk. There would be a lot of talk about calling each other homos, that sort of thing. When you're online, there aren't the normal socializing controls. You could say what you want, when you want, how you want, because there aren't the same sort of consequences. So therefore, things escalate very quickly.
The first time I kind of noticed that something was wrong or something was off was when my mum, my dad and I had gone to pick up Breck from Air Cadets. And we were driving home, it was dark, and I was just in the back. And They were yelling at Breck because I think he wanted to quit Air Cadets or something. Everyone was yelling, saying that Breck was spending way too much time on the computer and spending too much time gaming. And I really took no notice. It just seemed like a typical teenage thing where I understood that parents might not want their children on games 24/7, but I never could have imagined it was something more sinister.
One of the things that Danes did was try to turn the boys against parents with all their rules, So when Breck had joined Air Cadets because he wanted to be a pilot, and he loved it at the beginning, Danes started sort of making fun of anything that was establishment, anything that was organized, anything that you had to wear a uniform, that you had to show up at a certain time.
It's no secret that a lot of teenage children want to disassociate themselves from their parents. They're joining maturity, they're going through puberty, they want some autonomy. So it's a very natural thing for a teenager to want to rebel. But what's unusual about this case is the way that it escalated.
Danes started then to sort of turn Breck against everything, including religion and government and politics. It was like he was anti-everything.
Disturbed at the influence Louis Danes is developing over her son, Lauren attempts to confront him directly.
I wanted to see him face to face, like Breck did with his other friends. I wanted to have a face-to-face chat in his room. And I had offered to meet up in person as well in a public place. But Breck said, no, he doesn't want to meet you. He doesn't like parents, and he thinks you're too judgmental.
I remember my parents saying, like, why doesn't he want to meet in person if he's legit? Or why doesn't he want to meet the family?
I kept saying to Breck, I want to talk to him. And finally Breck said, okay, he's agreed to chat with you, but on Messenger. We live messaged back and forth. And I remember saying, why are you trying to turn Breck against religion? Why are you trying to turn Breck against school? Why are you trying to pull him away from family activities? And he just would say, well, Breck's a good boy. Why are you forcing him to do things that he doesn't want to do? Why are you forcing him to do things that make him unhappy? Breck's clever. Breck's so smart. He was like telling me about my own son. I got angry because it wasn't getting anywhere. He wasn't answering why he was trying to change Breck. He just kept telling me how great Breck was.
Lauren suspects that Danes is planning for Breck and the other boys to take part in a covert operation.
I sort of thought maybe he was grooming the boys for some sort of terrorist activity.
He would say that he was running Syrian refugees through a pipeline into other countries. He would portray himself as somebody who was part of the intelligence community. And a lot of the content that he was sharing was to do with terrorism and, quite nasty footage.
And I thought he was going to get them to do some mass hack on school or government computers, and they'd take the fall and he would get away with it. Maybe he'd put them on a big mission with real guns and get them to do something horrible. That went through my head. I sensed something was wrong. I just didn't know how to fix it. I was scared when I phoned the police because I wasn't sure. In my heart, I felt sure, but I didn't have proof. And I phoned the police and I literally said, I need to speak to the department that deals with grooming.
In desperation, Lauren contacts Surrey Police, but they struggle to understand her concerns.
I feel my son and his friends are being groomed by this guy who runs the server. And they said to me, what's the server? And I went, I don't know, it's where they get together and game. So it was like almost the blind leading the blind in this conversation.
Okay, and what sort of concerns do you have then? I mean, obviously there's that age difference, but what if he's...
He's trying to turn him against everything. He's grooming him for something because he's trying to change his thinking set on everything.
I think for grooming, the offence back then was that you had to arrange to meet on 2 separate occasions for it to be grooming. And of course, this just doesn't meet the criteria. It's just a 14-year-old gaming online with an 18-year-old.
It scares me, I don't know if he's trying to groom them to become part of his group.
Yeah. Well, we'll do some research on this, and then you've got the reference number there if you do find anything, you know, like his contact number or anything.
Basically, I was told 3 times that intelligence would be checked, that they would look into it.
But the police decided not to take the case any further, and it later emerged that Dane's name was not even checked on the police national computer database.
Surrey police, this, for them, it was maybe an 18-year-old undermining a mum's position with a 14-year-old.
That was then when I organized a meeting with other parents, and we sat the boys down 2 days later and literally said, look, we're worried.
Lauren and her ex-husband Barry outline a plan of action.
They decide that an intervention is in fact needed to physically tear Breck away from the relationship with Danes. So Breck was told that he can no longer go online. His computer was going to be taken away from him.
And so I even, said, I think you're being groomed. And Breck said, well, that's a harsh term to say grooming.
Breck and his friends idealised Lewis. Breck is young, he's only 14, perhaps a little bit childish, perhaps naive, but also Lewis, I think, is very cunning, deceitful and very manipulative.
Unbeknown to Lauren and the other parents, Lewis Danes is spying on their meeting.
Danes had asked Breck to record that meeting, and he had a little MP3 player in his pocket, so he was able to get that meeting recorded.
It's going to sound weird, but there's no one else who sort of I their interest with. Not in real life, in gaming. There's not that connection where you have sort of mutual interest.
It could be just one way to assert his dominance and control over Breck to show who's in charge. It could be to set up this dynamic of them being very much in it together, you know, so Lewis is saying to Breck, it's me and you versus your mother who's making life difficult for us.
Danes kept the recording and even made a version where he added his own commentary.
It's quite chilling, really, because you've got the two of them arguing in the background and Lauren arguing with Breck, and he's just in this monotonous voice. This is Lauren, the mother of Breck. Look at her and the way she's trying to control. And he's just weird. It's very strange.
With the recording in his possession, Danes has the upper hand.
At that point, Danes knew what we thought of him. He knew we were onto him, we didn't like him, we didn't trust him, we didn't believe him, and it became more dangerous because everything went underground. After we forbade the boys from gaming or speaking or socializing to Danes, Breck went back to acting like his happy-go-lucky self.
After hearing the outcome of the meeting, Danes secretly sends Breck a mobile phone so he can continue to communicate with him in private.
I thought everything was better. We didn't talk about, Danes anymore because I thought he was out of the picture.
The family spent Christmas together, and then into the new year, Breck went away on his trip to Spain. And sadly, that was the last time that Lauren saw Breck alive.
And I remember our last little meal together was Taco Bell, because that was my favorite naughty treat. And he ate just so, he was just such a good eater, because he would just enjoy it, and he could just put it away even though he was tall and thin. And I just remember enjoying that time with him because it was just us. It was a special time. And so I'm at least happy to know that he did have good times with me. And he would have known somewhere deep inside of him that I wasn't the bad guy.
Lauren hopes the school trip to Seville in Spain will mark a fresh start for Breck.
We hugged and kissed and said goodbye, and I just remember feeling so proud. And as he walked away, I thought how handsome he was.
When he was with the school party, he posted online him sitting next to a girl. Lewis Danes didn't like this. Lewis was berating him for putting a picture up online of him with a girl, and why would you leave yourself open to other people making comment about you and this sort of thing on Facebook? So Lewis obviously didn't like the fact that Breck was socialising with other people.
Lauren goes abroad on holiday herself, satisfied Danes no longer has a hold over Breck.
He texted me when he was away on the trip, and he just said, "Oh, it's amazing here, Mom. The food and the people, we're having such a good time." And I was so pleased, because I thought, this is exactly what I want for my kids. Life experiences outside of their bedroom and the computer, you know. And I honestly, I thought everything was on track. I really did. I hate to admit how wrong I was.
Breck returns from Spain and he goes to stay with his dad. And the next day he tells his dad that he is now going off to stay the night with his friend.
Breck doesn't reveal that the friend is Lewis Danes, who has ordered a cab to take Breck and his computer equipment on a 31-mile journey to his flat in Grays, Essex.
Now this is moving quite quickly into a real-world interaction between Breck and the man who has been grooming him.
And he has this idealised, almost fictional version of what he thinks the attacker's going to be like. It's somebody that he respects, somebody that he admires, and he turns up to the house and he suddenly realises that this is some sort of trap.
Essex Police Emergency.
Hi there. Okay. Hello. I need police and a forensics team to my address, please.
What do you mean? What's happened?
My friend and I got into an altercation, and I'm the only one who came out alive.
Are you telling me you've killed somebody?
Yes, I am.
Right, and who am I speaking to?
My name is Lewis Danes. I'm 18 years old.
Right, okay. And what's actually happened?
My friend came to stay the night with me yesterday, feeling very down, feeling suicidal.
One of the features is this kind of inappropriate politeness. You know, the way that he's initially really polite to the dispatch person. He's not really behaving like somebody who has just killed somebody.
And I woke up this morning, he was in a mess. I tried to calm him down. I hugged him, then said that I was there for him. He shrugged me off.
You'd expect the caller to be much more emotional. They would want to get help there and then, now.
You're telling me he is definitely dead?
Yes, I'm telling you he's definitely dead.
It just seems very methodical and thought through. He's talking as though he's rehearsed this call in his mind.
Okay, but why did he come to stay with you?
Because he was fed up with his home life.
Right, because he was fed up with his home life.
He's had a lot of problems. I've known him for a long time.
He goes into a lot of detail, and I can only assume that he's thought about this and he knows that he's going to rely on this as his defence.
He claims that Breck is incredibly unhappy on the home front, you know, wanting to commit self-harm, suicide.
What's happened this morning?
I woke up. He was just standing up. He was in a mess. Hands on his face. I got up, I put my arms around him and I said it was okay. He just shrugged me off and said no. I can't remember exactly what he said. He was going on about how he didn't want to go home. He was fed up with his life and he didn't want to go. In my room, adjacent to my bed, I have a chest of drawers. I had a penknife on there, folded. He picked it up, opened it, and then lost control.
Slow down, let me just take those details here. Penknife on the bedside table, Breck grabbed this,
yes.
What, in order to harm himself?
No, in order to harm me. He opened it and then lost control.
Lewis Danes is basically saying Breck came at him with a knife, and so Danes, in his mind, had to just resort to self-defence and ended up committing murder.
I, in self-defence, put my left arm up to block him from stabbing me effectively. We struggled. I got him to the ground. He got up. I grabbed a knife and I stabbed him once in the back of the neck, I believe somewhere near the brainstem. He turned around, tried to carry it on. I don't remember exactly what happened, but the fight ended with me cutting his throat. I believe I turned around and I slashed his throat.
Oh, it's just shocking. Incredibly difficult to listen to. People are harmed and killed in acts of self-defense. I mean, that does happen. I suspect that he does feel that by himself calling the police demonstrates the level of confidence he has that he may well get away with this.
My first reaction walking into that flat was how tidy it was. It was clean, it was tidy. There was no indication that anything untoward had taken place in that flat.
Lewis Daines is arrested at his home. Shortly after, Essex Police's digital forensics officer Clifton Pell searches the property.
I was shown around the lounge, I was shown around the kitchen, and there was the bedroom. And I opened the door and Breck was still lying there, covered in blood and with his throat cut. And when I looked across the bed, there was just blood all over the bed, and there was blood on the laptop as well. So, yeah, you take a deep breath and you feel really sad and really sorry for a life that's been taken.
I have a very clear sequence of events that day. It's just completely stuck in my mind. So I walked home from the park and I see these 2 police cars outside my house, which I thought initially was strange, and all of a sudden these 2 lady police officers, they came up to me. The police told me that I had to call my dad and tell him to come home, which is what I did. I called my dad, he was working, and I said that the police were at the house and they're saying that you need to come home. And he came in and all of a sudden there was just screaming and yelling and shouting, and we were so confused. We had no idea what was going on.
Chloe discovers that in the moments after the killing, Daines delivers a final message to the gamers on his server.
Daines had sent images of Breck's body to Breck's friends, and in turn Breck's friends communicated and messaged Breck's siblings to more or less say, if this is what's happened to Breck, we're really sorry for your loss.
I just remember being in my room, just crying and screaming, and I was just suffering alone basically. Just having to read this about my brother is just so hard to think about.
I'd only been in Spain a couple of days, and I woke up with an impending sense of doom. And I didn't know why, and I ran through my head, why do I feel this weird, heavy feeling?
Shortly after breakfast, Lorin's phone rang.
This is the worst call any parent could ever get, and it was Dad that said, I don't know how to tell you this, but Daines has killed Breck. And my life ended, really. I could have died right then and there. I couldn't stop screaming. I just couldn't believe it. And I fell to the ground and screamed until they brought in a doctor to give me something to calm me down. And it's just so hard to have something so horrible that you just can't take back and you can't fix. There's no fixing it.
For a digital forensics analyst, the challenging thing is to make sure you don't lose evidence.
And Pell faces an immediate problem. Daines had taken care to cover his tracks.
In the bathroom, The sink was full of water, but there were 3 mobile phones in there, and there was 2 hard drives and also an electrical board in there. So the implication was that Lewis Daines had tried to corrupt or do something with the electronics that were actually in that sink.
Pell and his team race to recover the data that Daines has attempted to destroy, while other officers look into the killer's background.
It quickly became apparent that Lewis Daines wasn't the high-flying computer engineer that he was claiming to be.
They find he lived with his grandparents after his mother moved abroad with a new partner.
And there are reports that he was in and out of different local authority care homes. At the time of grooming Breck, Daines was unemployed, essentially living in his grandparents' flat, and was in receipt of several welfare benefits.
Daines is taken into custody and interrogated by officers.
He tried to blame Breck and said that Breck was upset because his parents, particularly me, was so horrible. And he went to Daines to be consoled, and then he got upset. I think maybe Daines tried to kiss him, and then he got upset, and so he pulled out a knife. It was him trying to say that it was self-defense, and Breck, tried to hurt him.
He just wants to create this fantasy in his mind, claiming that it was self-defense when he really killed him in cold blood.
Breck was tied up with duct tape. It was just one of his, sort of web of lies.
For ourselves as digital forensics officers, we are responsible for the recovery of data from digital devices and for the processing of that data and then making that available for review to investigators.
Pell and his team need to find a way to recover texts from the waterlogged phones found in Daines's sink.
They did have to be dried out. It's not the moisture causes problems, it's when a device dries out and you have like electrolytes, little conductive elements that then mess with the electronics. We made sure that those devices were dried properly. We got data off the 2 phones. There's another one that wasn't actually working.
The data on the phones offers a string of vital clues.
Daines sent a message to Breck saying, when you come over, you need to tell your dad that you're somewhere else. So Lewis Daines prepped Breck with an answer that he was going to be going to a friend, and he wasn't to tell his dad that he was staying over at his friend's until the night, so that will then give him a chance to then get over to Lewis's and then to be able to keep the deception going.
More recovered texts reveal Daines lied to Breck that he was seriously ill and wanted him to take over his software company. He asked Breck to meet him in person at his home to finalize the details. Pell's team recover other files from Daines's laptop showing this offer was merely bait.
Where I look at the sort of date that we had, Lewis did plan this attack. He ordered online condoms and duct tape in the same order. That was at the beginning of 2014.
And these were discovered to have been used during the murder. Premeditation is a distinctive type of murder. It shows that the perpetrator has thought through the act that they're about to commit. It shows that they've committed to carrying out that particular violent crime.
Bodily fluids found at the scene suggest the crime was a depraved sexual act.
And I think for the blood, the saliva, the DNA, all those things point to the fact that it was a sexually motivated murder.
And as investigators explore Daines' school days, they make another grim discovery.
It came to light that as a 15-year-old boy, Daines had been accused of raping another boy. Now, this particular allegation didn't go anywhere. It didn't lead to any convictions at all.
When Lauren had contacted Surrey police 3 months earlier, they had promised to investigate Daines's background. It turned out they had not even run a search on his name.
I think I was pretty angry to think that Daines sexually assaulted another boy because he wasn't punished. I don't think anything happened to him.
An independent police complaints commission report finds that a police national computer check should have been made into Daines's background after Lauren's call, but no checks were carried out. Surrey police admit mistakes were made and pay Breck's family compensation in 2016.
From a mother's perspective, that aspect must be incredibly difficult to reconcile. There were warning signs there, there were red flags there. Breck's mother was shouting her suspicions from the rooftops, and ultimately it fell on deaf ears and serves now as a very stark reminder of the real dangers of online predators.
Daines is charged with murder, but despite the damning dossier of evidence, he continues to insist his actions were justified.
I was furious. The fact that he was claiming self-defense and saying that my brother was down and depressed was just crazy to me. I was horrified to think that people might believe his story.
I was nervous. I hadn't ever been to court for anything. And the first day, the jurors all came in and were chosen, and the pleas were read out, and Daines said not guilty to everything. And yeah, we didn't know what to expect.
There are a number of factors why somebody like Daines would grow up to be who he was and to do what he did. Certain traumas in childhood can, go into kind of fracturing somebody's identity and personality to an extent that they can themselves carry out harmful acts against other people.
And even from behind bars, Lauren believes Daines's threat to her family hasn't gone away.
He found a way from prison to send messages and tweets and a blog, and he was able to get his voice out, which is completely illegal. And he basically was, again, saying I was a bad mom, saying that all I cared about was raising money. I remember actually feeling really scared at the time because I didn't know if he'd escaped from prison. I thought, did he get out? Are my kids safe? Is he out and looking for the rest of my family?
And her fears are heightened when Lauren's daughter Chloe receives a series of Snapchat messages.
I don't know if it was Lewis, I don't know if it was a random person. He knew the exact location of the grave where Breck was buried. He knew too many details that I feel like wasn't on the news. And he said that Breck was very sexy before he died, and he sent him nudes and asked if I wanted to see them. And then he wanted to speak to my mom as well. He was like, is Lauren there? And it was horrific.
How devastating it must be for Breck's family. It's re-traumatizing, so they've already gone through his horrific murder and that loss. And then to be goaded from prison.
Police investigated, but he had set up a system whereby they couldn't trace it, and he didn't actually get in trouble for it, but hopefully it's in his records for when he tries to get probation. He's never shown remorse. He's never said he's sorry. He's always blamed me, so he's not fit for human consumption.
I like to remember Breck as being the older figure of the siblings, the protector of us three. In our childhood photos, it was always me and the triplets just all in a row, all the same height, and then just Breck was towering over us. I'm not a big fan of some of the ways that people have portrayed Breck online. Some will say that my brother was stupid or dumb. Why would he fall for that? What an idiot for going there and believing those lies when there's just such a simple explanation. He was groomed. It goes to show that even the smartest person can just be completely groomed into believing such ridiculous lies.
I have a theory that a lot of bad things that happen in the world are because of jealousy. And I definitely feel that Danes was jealous of Brecht. He knew what he wanted to be. He wanted to be a pilot. He wanted to work in technology. He was focused. He was innately good and handsome and clever and funny. And, you know, I adored that kid.
A vibrant and loving young mother.
She was just an awesome person. She had a little feisty side to her because of the redhead, but she was always looking out for everybody else.
Is found savagely murdered inside an office building washroom.
There was insulated electrical wire used to strangle her.
It appears there had been a sexual assault.
Detectives pursue multiple suspects.
There were problems with the marriage. They had had issues. They had been arguing.
He was in the building the night she was killed. His prints matched the prints inside the bathroom stall.
And hunt down an elusive killer.
We talked to the attorney who states that he is probably somewhere in South America.
I said, okay, where's he at? Can we get him?
That no one could have imagined.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe it.
It was very unexpected to see him as the actual killer.
Known for its live music scene, Austin, Texas is also one of the safest big cities in the country.
Austin's kind of one of those cool vibe cities, and it's just a very good mix of people.
There's a lot of green belts and parks and creeks and trails. It's a really neat place to live. Austin has not had the kind of crime and the volume of crime as other large cities. People do typically feel safe.
But in 1983, the town is rocked when a local businessman makes a gruesome discovery.
In the early morning hours of September 20th, 1983, the Austin Police Department received a 911 call. One of the tenants of an office complex had come in the morning and discovered things were out of place. There was a cleaning cart out in the hallway, so he went to try to find out if anyone else was still in the building. He did discover a deceased female in the upstairs men's restroom.
The 911 caller did not know her name, but he recognized her as the woman who did clean the building.
Police are dispatched to the scene.
When we located the female victim in the men's restroom, she was positioned inside of the stall.
She was undressed. There was insulated electrical wire that had small loops tied on the ends of them. Detectives believed that electrical wire was used to strangle her and be the cause of her death. It appeared, because she had no defensive wounds at all, that the killer came up from behind and surprised her.
Everything in the crime scene suggested that this was a violent attack.
There was wet toilet paper inside of her nose and her mouth. It stands to reason the killer put that in her mouth and her nose after he strangled her to ensure that she was good and dead.
There was a bodily fluid and a clothing that made it appear as if she was drug across the floor. Her clothes were scattered amongst the restroom, and it appeared that there had been a sexual assault. The victim was identified by an ID that was found inside of her purse. She was Lori Stout, a 22-year-old female from Austin.
While forensics collect samples, investigators look for other evidence left behind by the killer.
A significant fingerprint was located in the men's stall of the restroom.
When dragging her in there, a person would almost have to brace themselves on the wall of the inside of the stall. The print inside the bathroom stall matched a print on the second floor fire escape. So the two of those were pretty significant.
Had the killer fled through the fire escape after committing the murder? Detectives head down to the parking lot looking for more clues.
They found that there was a spool that was used for insulated electrical wiring inside the dumpster. They Also found some looser pieces of the same type of wiring that was used to kill the victim.
Detectives bag the items for analysis. Back inside, police start piecing together a theory of who could have committed this horrible act.
The fact that the victim was killed inside the building in the middle of the night suggested that whoever did this had access or a key to get in it.
Detectives canvassed the building and talked to employees, but determined that no one had seen anything suspicious.
We were able to talk with 2 witnesses that saw Lori at about 12:30 a.m. as they locked up and secured the building and left.
We know that she was last seen alive around 12:30 in the morning, and the employee at the building discovered her body around 8 a.m. So she died sometime during that time frame.
Just as investigators are finishing up, a frantic man arrives at the scene. He identifies himself as Gary Stout and demands to know where his wife Lori is.
Gary Stout told detectives he woke up that morning and discovered that his wife was not home yet from work. He got worried and he drove up to the building, which was a short distance away, and discovered her car still in the parking lot, but it was surrounded by numerous police cars. It was at that point that the police spoke with him and broke the news that his wife was found dead.
He was obviously traumatized by what had happened.
As police take Gary down to the station for questioning, the devastating news soon spreads to the rest of Lori's family.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. My whole world changed. I no longer had my confidant, no longer had my best friend. It was horrible, horrible.
When we found out that Lori had been killed, it was a big impact. It was overwhelming.
Born in Arlington, Virginia in 1960, Lori Coffey was a naturally warm and caring soul.
Laurie was the oldest of Laurie, myself, and TJ, but she was kind of the mother hen of us all. She had a little feisty side to her, and I think maybe because of the redhead, but she was always looking out for everybody else. She was just an awesome person. She really, truly was.
Lori was the leader of us 3 Musketeers, me, Beverly, and Lori. And she kept us going.
After moving to Austin with her mother and siblings, in 1977, Lori met Gary Stout, who worked logistics for the military.
It all flourished very fast. She was so giddy about Gary, and they fell in love. All in all, he just seemed like a good guy, so we were all, okay, so this is it.
After a whirlwind courtship, Lori and Gary married the following year. 3 years later, Lori became pregnant.
She was over the moon, very, very happy. I mean, that's what she wanted. She wanted to be married, start having a family, and she was on her way.
But Lori is soon forced to face the harsh realities of military family life.
Gary got orders to go to Belgium. She was very sad. Lori was sad that Gary was gone overseas, and here she was facing having a baby on her own at home.
On January 26, 1982, while Gary is away, Lori gives birth to a baby girl.
Lori had a really easy labor, and now we have this little baby, and of course she was ecstatic.
I think that she very much enjoyed being a mother. I think that she experienced probably the happiest months of her life after I was born.
In order to spend more time with his family, Gary left the military and took a job as a maintenance worker in the same building where Lori worked nights as a cleaner.
She was very excited that he was coming home. That's all she wanted, just to be a mom and wife, homemaker.
With her life finally on track, how did this loving young mother become the victim of a cold-blooded killer?
As with any investigation, you have to look at those that are closest to the victim and those that have motive. As an employee of the building and maintenance worker there, Gary had access.
Down at the station, police questioned Gary about his marriage to Lori.
When we asked him about any problems in the relationship, he quickly admitted that they had had issues, they had been arguing, and were unhappy.
Detectives discovered that Lori actually went and stayed with her sister, Beverly. shortly before the murder happened because of a really big argument that she had with Gary.
Things were not going all that well for her and Gary, and she was miserable.
This definitely created a concern that there were problems with the marriage. So knowing that he has access and motive, it raises the level of suspicion that he could have been involved in this crime.
Coming up, detectives uncover disturbing secrets.
He wasn't happy in his relationship, and he admitted that he was looking at leaving her.
Lori's family felt very strongly that he was the killer.
Before a shocking tip takes police in a whole new direction.
We received information from a female victim of a man that committed a similar attack against her.
This is a big turning point in the investigation.
Could this be a serial rapist? Could it be a serial murder?
And has detectives risking it all to catch a killer.
We knew it was going to have to be something big for us to find him.
We were holding our breath. We weren't sure it was going to happen.
Police investigating the murder of 22-year-old mother Lori Stout are questioning their first suspect, her husband Gary.
When Gary was being interviewed, he was very forthcoming about the poor state of his marriage with Lori. So it was a little bit of a red flag.
At this point in the investigation, we need additional information about problems that may be in their relationship.
Lori and Gary were happy. When they first got married, she was proud to be a wife. That's all she wanted.
But things changed when Gary returned from overseas.
Lori wanted it to just be like it was before he left, and unfortunately that was not the case.
So knowing the family's account of their relationship as well, knowing that it was a volatile relationship, that created concern that he could have been frustrated with Lori and committed this type of act.
When detectives pressed Gary for details about why his marriage was falling apart, he makes an alarming confession.
He admitted that he had actually had an affair and was looking at leaving Lori.
Gary tells detectives that he met a woman while overseas and that she had since come to visit him in Austin.
At this point, the detectives are wondering, does Gary want Lori out of the picture given the very bad state of their marriage and the fact that he wants to be with this woman he's having an affair with?
Gary explains that he ultimately chose to stay with Lori, but detectives become even more suspicious after they ask him for an alibi.
He stated that the night before, he and Lori had an argument, so she went and slept on the couch. At one point, she finally just got up in the early morning hours, went to work. Gary did not have an alibi that we could confirm. He was at home with the young child, asleep. He could have left his house, gone up to the building, and come back. That would not be something we could verify.
So the marital difficulties, and now we've got a big fight, and Gary having access to the building. He's somebody that they're looking at pretty hard.
Detectives asked Gary to provide samples of his blood and fingerprints to be compared with evidence found at the crime scene.
He was cooperative with us. He provided samples that were requested.
Looking further into Gary's movements leading up to the murder, investigators reach out to his boss at the office building.
The manager of the building informed the detectives that Gary had fixed a water heater the day before Lori was killed. And he used the same type of electrical wiring that was used to kill Lori.
This was another extremely big flag in the case. All these things together really raised the suspicion that this is the guy.
As police wait for forensic testing results, Lori's autopsy report comes in.
Lori's cause of death was in fact strangulation, and that seemed to match the ligature found at the scene.
What was determined is that a sexual assault had taken place.
They were able to get a sample of semen. However, this is 1983, so there was no DNA testing available. In order to do any comparison, we used blood type antigens. This kind of evidence is helpful in narrowing down the field of suspects.
When we found out how Lori was actually killed, it was disturbing. First thought to my mind, one sick individual. One very sick individual that did it.
Pure evil. absolute pure evil.
Detectives eagerly receive the results of Gary's fingerprints and blood tests, but they are far from conclusive.
Gary's fingerprints did not match the one inside the stall, but did match prints in the building. But he has access to the building and he is working there. His blood type, it matches the type found in the semen. But of course, Gary is married to Lori, so it's another piece of evidence that can go both ways.
Ultimately, we couldn't use fingerprints or any blood work to exclude him.
Running out of options, detectives try one last method to get to the truth.
Gary Stout was provided an opportunity to take a polygraph. During that interview, he was asked if he was responsible for the murder of Lori, and he advised he wasn't. The results of that polygraph indicated that he was being truthful and there was no deception.
Detectives were surprised that Gary passed the polygraph. Now, detectives have motive, they have access, but no evidence conclusively to show that Gary is in fact the killer.
With nothing to hold him on, Gary is free to go.
At this point, Gary is not ruled out as a suspect, but he takes a little bit more of a backseat.
Looking for new leads, investigators turn their focus back to the numerous employees who work at the building where Lori was killed.
What's difficult, particularly about a public space like this, is so many people have access. We talked to everybody that was a tenant in that building and started working our way through that process. Many of those folks were excluded based on fingerprints, evidence, everything else that could really put them to the side.
But police learned that the building's tenants weren't the only ones who had access that night.
We discovered that registration was being conducted from the University of Texas' satellite location at this office complex. And they stayed late after hours so that folks could come after work, sign up late into the evening. So this was definitely something of interest for us.
Detectives were able to get the names of the male students who had gone in that night, and they had them come down to the police department and they got fingerprints of these individuals.
Police processed the fingerprints of over a dozen students and receive an alarming result.
We were able to rule everyone out on the list with the exception of one. We had a match, a fingerprint inside the men's restroom as well as a fire escape door. So this person is somebody we want to talk to and interview.
Detectives investigating the brutal murder of Lori Stout have just matched a set of crime scene fingerprints with someone who was in the building that night.
The University of Texas was having a sign-up registration at the satellite campus, which allowed people to come after hours in the evenings after work in order to get signed up for classes. So we start going through the list of registrants.
Detectives were able to determine that there was one student whose prints matched the prints inside the bathroom stall where Lori was found, and also on the fire escape door on that second floor.
That individual was identified as Robert Van Weese, and he was 18 years old.
Investigators interview Robert about his movements on the night Lori was killed.
He told us that he had been there for registration, and on his way out, he used the men's restroom upstairs. Once he was done in the restroom, he exited the fire escape because it was closer to where his vehicle was parked, which would explain why his fingerprints were found in the men's stall and the fire escape door.
Robert Van Weese did acknowledge that he saw the cleaning lady, which was our victim, Lori, after using the bathroom on the second floor before he exited the building.
Robert tells detectives that he left the building at around 12:15 a.m. Before investigators look to verify his story, they ask Robert for a blood sample to compare to the semen found at the crime scene.
Robert Van Weese was cooperative. He gave the blood sample at the time, and the detectives submitted it for testing.
There is nothing that we discover on Robert Van Weese's criminal history or anything else that causes concern. It appears he's had no contact with law enforcement and no violent offenses in the past.
He came from a family that is very well respected. His parents are pretty well-known surgeons in the Austin area. There didn't seem to be anything that would suggest him to behave in this kind of violent way.
While they wait for the results, detectives look for anyone who can corroborate Robert's story.
Detectives interviewed 2 employees of the education office, and they confirmed that they saw Robert Van Wiese leave the building at 12:15. We know Lori was still alive because there were witnesses that confirmed she was alive at 12:30.
With Robert looking less and less like a viable suspect, his blood test results come in.
The analysis of the blood sample told us that Robert was not a match to the bodily fluids found at the crime scene.
The discovery means there is no hard evidence against Robert, and they are forced to let him go.
Robert Van Wiese was ruled out and eliminated as a suspect.
With no new leads, the investigation falters. As weeks pass with no arrests, fear in the community grows.
The nature of the crime had created a lot of panic for residents, particularly females. It was difficult because there was no resolution.
It left a lot of fear in the community. The police felt pressure to find out who was responsible for Lori's death. I mean, this was a totally innocent mother, 22 years old, taken from her family in a very violent attack.
The people in and around that area where she was killed, they were interested in knowing what was going on. It was tough on our family. It is very frustrating. There's somebody out there that has taken a life, and you want that person to be held accountable.
Anytime there's a crime committed like this, there's an inherent pressure to solve it, to try to bring some closure and some comfort to the family and to the community.
A person that could do something like this, that's not somebody that's going to stop at that one act. Typically speaking, that person is going to continue to hurt other people.
We're always worried that, you know, he can continue to commit these kind of acts until he's brought to justice.
1 month after Lori's murder, police receive a promising new lead.
We received information from a female victim of a man that committed a similar attack against her. The victim was sexually assaulted and strangled, but she was able to get away.
He mistakenly thought she was dead, and she was able to identify him. That person's name was Daryl Kemp. Daryl Kemp at that point was in prison, but he was not in prison at the time that Lori was killed.
And so we started looking into this. We evaluated the information and started to determine if this could potentially be a suspect in this case.
Police dig into Daryl Kemp's background and discover a disturbing pattern.
It's determined that Daryl Kemp committed an attack in 1960, similar, where the victim was sexually assaulted and strangled.
He was convicted for the rape and murder of a woman named Marjorie Hipperson in California. He did receive the death penalty for that. But later on, the death penalty got overturned.
Ultimately, he was released and paroled in 1978. That's when Daryl Kemp moved to Austin.
His MO matched. He's killed in this fashion before, and he was in Austin at the time. So this is going to be somebody that detectives look at pretty intently.
Could this be a serial rapist? Could it be a serial murder? We had questions that we needed to get answers to.
1 month after young mother Lori Stout was found raped and murdered in a bathroom stall, police are investigating a tip that she was the victim of convicted serial killer Daryl Kemp.
Detectives at this time were thinking that Daryl Kemp was a strong possibility as a suspect because of the similar MO, which was sexual assault and strangulation.
Investigators learned that although Daryl is currently in jail for an unrelated crime, he was a free man at the time Lori was killed. Detectives head to prison to question him.
The difficult part about interviewing somebody like Daryl Kemp is he's obviously been down this road before. He's got knowledge of how investigations work, and so information may be withheld or may not be genuine in his responses based on where he thinks or feels like your questions are leading him.
Detectives start by questioning Daryl about where he was around the time of Lori's murder.
They're asking him questions that would help tie him or connect him to the area that the building was located in. They asked if he knew where this building was, where he lived, basically to try to put him in a geographical area, figure out where he frequented.
Daryl tells investigators he wasn't near the office building where Lori was killed and has no ties to the area.
Daryl Kemp was asked if he was familiar with Lori Stout. He said he wasn't. Things that we're trying to pay attention to is whether his statements are truthful. Does his body language support his statement? Does it appear he's being deceptive? And is he forthcoming with his answers?
Not trusting the word of a convicted killer, detectives shift gears.
He was asked if he would take a polygraph. He hesitated with that because he didn't trust polygraphs. He is not cooperative at all.
It's the same story when investigators ask him for his fingerprints and a blood sample.
Again, he was very uncooperative.
Based on all the evidence collected, we had enough information to obtain a warrant.
Police collect Daryl's samples and eagerly wait for the results.
When the results of the analysis were returned, it was determined that he was not the suspect in this murder. It's very difficult and frustrating because we're at a stalling point again.
With no other leads, the case once again hits a wall. As the months turn into years, Lori's loved ones struggle with the lack of closure.
Why are we not getting any answers? Give us something. I myself have been lost without her.
Every time October 1st rolls around, first thing I think is, it's Lori's birthday. Anytime when September comes around, when she was taken from us, it's not good.
The suspicion that Lori's husband Gary was the killer continues to linger and causes a deep divide.
My mother's family, even members of his own family, believed that my dad was involved.
We all still had that suspicion that Gary had something to do with it.
Eventually, Gary takes Dale and moves out of state.
Gary, he didn't want to have anything else to do with us. So it was like, oh my God, now we can't see Dale. I lost my sister, but I also lost that connection with my niece.
Being so young, she didn't really remember her mom. So it was probably quite hard on Dale.
When I was growing up, there weren't a whole lot of conversations about my mother. It was just the understanding of she wasn't there anymore.
As Dale grows older, she begins to ask questions.
My dad did not like talking about it. I did not have a family member sit me down and explain to me that this is what had happened to her. It wasn't until I got older, got access to the internet, that's when I learned that she was attacked, that she had been strangled, that she had been raped, and then she had been murdered. It was very overwhelming finding out about it in that way.
Lori's family continues to push for her killer to be brought to justice.
We never gave up hope. We tried to keep it fresh and focused on it. We were constantly checking in.
We had to get this case closed to help give our family a little peace. It was overwhelming.
The pressure finally pays off. And in 1992, nearly 10 years after Lori's murder, a new team of detectives reopen her case.
Now we have new eyes looking at everything. They look at the crime scene photos. They read all the police reports. They look at the various people that were interviewed.
Part of that process is to go back and look at old evidence. Are there things now that are available to law enforcement that weren't previously available? Is there testing that can be done?
Now we're in 1992, so we have DNA testing, which is much more powerful.
With that in mind, investigators revisit their prime suspect, Lori's husband, Gary Stout.
So Gary was contacted again and provided a DNA sample, which was compared to that obtained at the crime scene.
Police are hopeful that they'll finally have the evidence they need to make an arrest. But when the results come back, they are shocked at what they reveal.
It was determined that Gary was not a match. So officially, he could be ruled out as a suspect and remove the cloud of doubt that had been hanging over his head for some period of time.
I do believe that my father felt relief, but it was very difficult for him to talk about.
With Gary cleared, cold case detectives go back over the old files, line by line.
With any review of a case, you look at who's been interviewed, who's been eliminated. And what was discovered is that one of the reports that was provided as far as the blood typing seemed to have an error.
The documentation that was used to finalize the forensic report that excluded a suspect actually showed that there was a clerical error in that lab report. And that particular suspect should have been included as a suspect, not excluded. This is a big turning point in the investigation.
10 years after wife and mother Lori Stout was savagely murdered, cold case detectives have unearthed a stunning error in the results of a blood test. That means a previously cleared suspect might not be innocent after all.
What was discovered is that the report said the subject could be eliminated, but there was a clerical error in the document and it should have read that he could not be eliminated.
This suspect is Robert Van Wiese, the 18-year-old University of Texas student. He was in the building the night Lori was killed, registering for a class, and he's the same person whose prints were found inside the bathroom stall and also on the second-floor fire escape door.
Detectives look into what Robert Van Wiese had been doing the last 10 years.
Robert Van Wiese had no criminal history. Here we have this 18-year-old college student coming from a well-to-do family, parents who are professionals, seemed to have a very normal, happy upbringing. He was cooperative. So that all combined with the report that we received, naturally excluded him as a suspect.
Could 18-year-old Robert really have committed such a brutal crime?
In talking with witnesses, Robert Van Wiese is seen about 12:15 a.m. and leaving at about 12:30. They see Lori in the building by herself.
Detectives re-examine the fingerprints he left at the crime scene and notice something troubling.
What they discover is that his story of exiting the building through that second-floor fire escape door would naturally support fingerprints being left on the inside of that door, as if you're pushing it open to leave. But some prints of his are found on the door handle on the exterior of the door, as if you're opening it to enter the building.
What this told us is that he had obviously left the building, but he had also come back in.
He would have been able to re-enter it through that same door if he had propped it open with something.
The discoveries mean investigators need to talk to Robert, but there's a problem.
We try to locate Robert Van Wiese, but we're not able to. We reach out to family members who are not cooperative. They provide an attorney's contact. We talk to the attorney who states that Robert Van Wiese is probably somewhere in South America.
All evidence up to that point showed he was in the Austin area, and then he likely finds out that he, once again, is a suspect, and now we have DNA testing capability, so he flees.
Fearing Robert has left the country, detectives scramble to find him. They interview dozens of his friends and family members, but no one is willing to cooperate. Before they can launch an all-out search, detectives still need more proof that Robert's the killer. So they come up with a plan to obtain his DNA.
With Robert Van Wiese having fled, we cannot get a sample from him, but what we are able to do is get what's called YSTR testing accomplished. And that's familial DNA, and it's specific to the Y chromosome that all brothers and fathers would share. So since Robert Van Wiese has brothers in the Austin area, that's something we can actually test.
In order to obtain the sample, detectives conducted surveillance with family members, and at one point they observed one of the brothers discard trash and retrieve it.
Trash is not something you need to get a search warrant for because it's what's deemed abandoned. So detectives take specific items that would gather DNA evidence, like razor blades and toothpicks, and they conduct YSTR testing.
When the DNA tests come back, the results are conclusive.
And lo and behold, it's a match.
Finally, we're able to make a direct connection with Robert Van Wiese to the DNA found at the crime scene. It was surprising to know that a young male coming from the background that he did had the ability to do this at such a young age.
There were no red flags with him. And so it was very unexpected to see him as the actual killer.
We finally had a name. I just totally broke down. And so you're trying to wrap your head around, how could an 18-year-old do something like this?
It was shocking because I was 18 myself at the time. I would have never have had that cross my mind. I said, okay, where is he at? Can we get him? And then that's when we learned that he was gone.
Robert Van Wiese is charged with murder and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, and a warrant is issued for his arrest. Investigators team up with the FBI and launch an international manhunt.
The Van Wiese family owned a lot of properties throughout Mexico. We conducted telephone toll analysis. We looked at financial records. We monitored travel of Van Wiese's family. We did a tremendous amount of ground surveillance on locations where we thought he might be. There were some tips that the FBI received for sightings of Van Wiese in Mexico in certain locations, but we weren't successful in locating him.
Years pass with no sign of Robert, but detectives refuse to quit.
All you want to do is bring the guy back so he can face justice and get some kind of closure for the victims. But even the FBI, we have limited access, limited resources, and Mexico is a big country. There's plenty of places for him to hide.
It is very frustrating because for me, I've lived my entire life waiting for justice, but also very cognizant of the fact that it may never happen.
Then in 2016, the hunt for Robert Van Wiese takes a promising turn.
Van Wiese had been on the run for 20 years, so I knew it was going to have to be something big for us to find him. And so we discussed it, and we said, let's do it, let's go for it.
On December 13th, 2016, the FBI places Robert Van Wiese on their top 10 most wanted list.
This was huge for our case because it brings awareness, but also that comes with a $100,000 reward. So it was exciting to know that we're making traction.
Once we announced his addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, we again interviewed people that knew him and possibly knew where he was. Probably the most important interview was with Van Wiese's mother. We said, Robert is going to be arrested. He is coming home. The safest way is to turn himself in. I think the mother realized with the $100,000 reward, his name on the 10 most wanted list, that it was going to be insurmountable that he was going to get arrested.
The pressure pays off, and a phone call comes in that changes everything.
Robert Van Wiese's attorney contacted the district attorney's office to let them know that he wants to turn himself in.
33 years after the murder of Lori Stout, her elusive killer, Robert Van Wiese, is ready to return to the U.S. to face justice.
Robert Van Wiese's lawyer contacted the district attorney's office and started to inquire about possible surrender with a plea bargain agreement. Typically speaking, when someone is a fugitive, we do not negotiate, but circumstances in this situation are quite unique. Mexico will not agree to extradite to Texas if the death penalty is on the table. So we will not get him in our hands if he's arrested in Mexico unless we agree to not have death penalty on the table.
Wanting a swift resolution, the district attorney negotiates a deal.
Van Wiese would agree to turn himself in, and they agreed to 30 years in prison.
On January 26, 2017, police head to the Mexican border to meet Robert.
The plan was for him to surrender, but we were holding our breath. We weren't sure it was going to happen.
We're anxious that this is finally going to take place, but until we have Robert Van Wiese in physical custody, we can't let our guard down.
The arrangement was that he would meet us at the halfway point on the pedestrian bridge. There's a line in the middle. On one side says Mexico, on the other side says United States. He was to meet us there at 1 o'clock. He didn't show up.
As the minutes tick by, investigators start to worry they've been duped.
We had assurances from the attorney that he would show up, but at any point during that time, he could have turned around and changed his mind, and there was nothing we could have done.
At 1:36 p.m., a lone figure approaches the border.
He walked up very slowly, stopped at the line. He introduced himself as Robert Van Wiese, and I said to him, "You ready to turn yourself in?" He took a deep breath. He closed his eyes. He said, "Yes." I said, "Step on across." And he took one step over, and he was arrested.
Seeing him walk across that bridge and seeing law enforcement put handcuffs on him, it was extremely satisfying.
There'd been so much work from so many different people over the years, that from 1983 up until 2017, now we have somebody that's accountable and be brought to justice. Was one of the most rewarding experiences in my career.
I sent the picture to Dale and let her know we got him. And I get a text back that it apparently was Dale's birthday. So it was pretty emotional.
She showed me a photo of Van Wiese being escorted into custody. It's kind of hard to believe that after all of these years that it would be that day of all days that he would turn himself in.
It was, and it still is surreal that it finally did happen. I mean, it just emotions everywhere. I just can't, it's finally over. It's finally over. Finally over.
The plea deal means Robert does not have to speak to investigators, leaving them to piece together how they believe the murder unfolded.
He showed up that night to register for classes. He sees Lori as she's cleaning. It's possible that Robert Van Wiese and Lori Stout had an interaction as he passed her. Maybe she spoke to him. He goes to the bathroom, develops his plan on coming back in.
He's opportunistic. The opportunity rose, and he left through that fire escape door on the second floor, propped it open.
And once the other workers had all left, I think he came back in.
When he came back in, he would have passed in the parking lot the dumpster that had some leftover electrical wiring that Gary Stout had used that day for the hot water heater, and grabbed it and went upstairs and then attacked her, raped her, and killed her. Lori was killed in probably one of the most personal, violent ways that someone can be killed. Robert Van Wiese is an extremely cold and calculating person.
On March 28, 2017, Robert pleads guilty to Lori's murder and is sentenced to 30 years in prison. Lori's sister, Beverly, is there to deliver an emotional impact statement.
I looked him right in the eye and told him what he had taken from our family and what it had done. And, I just told him I hope he rots in hell and gets to feel some of that terror that my sister felt that night. I know in my heart he is where he needs to be.
I think Lori's family felt a sense of relief, a sense of closure that maybe now, at least my hope for them now with that is that they could at least start to heal.
Him being arrested and incarcerated does bring closure. I think that that's what everybody dreams about when a crime like this happens to one of their family members.
Still see Lori's face quite often. She was a hoot. Lori was a